Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a creature, right? So revolutionary. It literally changed how we see an entire branch of life. Not some brand new discovery, but one whose impact is, well, it's still rippling through science. And pop culture, too. Today we're doing a deep dive into Deinonychus antirrhopus. You probably know it better as the terrible claw. Our mission here is to explore how this single animal just dismantled decades of scientific assumptions about dinosaurs and how it became this, like, uncredited star of one of the biggest movie franchises ever, which created this huge disconnect, between the science and what people think they know. We'll uncover why its name is basically a scientific thesis statement and how its killing claw, well, it works differently than you might expect. And yeah, did it really hunt in packs like in the movies? We'll get into that.
It's truly remarkable, really, because this animal, it didn't just add a new species to the list. No, it's discovery. And the study that followed fundamentally redefined dinosaurs. From these slow, lumbering reptiles to dynamic, agile, pretty intelligent predators, it truly ignited what paleontologists now call the Dinosaur Renaissance.
Okay, so let's start with its early history, which is actually kind of surprising. The very first bits of Deinonychus, they were found way back in 1931 near Billings, Montana. And guess who found them? The famous fossil hunter, Barnum Brown. But here's the thing. His main focus was a much bigger plant eater, Tenontosaurus. So Deinonychus was just this intriguing side find. He even called it Adaptations informally, but yeah, never published it officially.
It's quite the backstory, isn't it? A really significant find just sitting there kind of unnoticed for decades.
Exactly. And then, the big moment. Fast forward to August 1964. A Yale University team led by John Ostrom, they're in Montana's Cloverleaf Formation. And they find something amazing, an exquisitely preserved clawed hand, then a foot with that sickle claw, the famous one, and eventually over 1,000 bones from at least 3 different individuals. Ostrom, he quickly realized, hey, this is the same thing Brown found 30 years ago in Costra. So after years of careful prep work and study, he published in 1969, and that's when he formally named it Deinonychus antirrhopus.
And this discovery, Ostrom's work, it just caused this huge shift, a seismic shift in paleontology. His really meticulous analysis of the anatomy, the lightweight bones, the grasping hands, that stiff tail, and especially that terrible claw, it forced him to a radical conclusion. He actually wrote that Deinonychus must have been a fleet-footed, highly predacious, extremely agile, and very active animal. I mean, that was a direct challenge, a slap in the face, really, to the old view of dinosaurs. Slow, dumb, cold-blooded failures. This whole paradigm shift, the Dinosaur Renaissance, as Ostrom's student Robert Baker later called it, it just reshaped everything. The evidence from Deinonychus strongly suggested, a high metabolism, which led Ostrom and Baker to push this really controversial idea back then, that some dinosaurs were warm-blooded, endothermic, like birds and mammals. And there's more. The similarities between Deinonychus' skeleton and the earliest bird, Archaeopteryx, they were striking. So Ostrom revived this old 19th century idea that birds came directly from dinosaurs. An idea that had been dismissed for decades, but now there was powerful new evidence. And today, that connection is fundamental. It's bedrock paleontology. So yeah, Deinonychus, this agile killer, became the key to understanding where birds came from.
Wow. Okay, let's dig into that name then. Deinonychus antirrhopus. You said it's not just a label, it's like a summary of the whole hypothesis that changed paleontology. So Deinonychus, that comes from ancient Greek, right? Deinonychos meaning terrible and onyx meaning claw. Ostrom picked that name to really highlight that huge sickle-shaped claw on the second toe. It could be up to 13 centimeters, that's like 5 inches, along the curve. He saw it as a primary weapon, a terrible claw, implying this super agile, ferocious predator.
Exactly. And then the species name, Antirrhopus, that fills in the rest. It's from Greek, too, meaning counterbalancing, and that refers directly to the tail. How Ostrom thought it worked. See, the tail wasn't limp or dragging like you see in old dinosaur pictures. Nope. It was reinforced by this complex mesh of bony tendons, ossified tendons, and these really long overlapping bits of vertebrae. Basically turned most of the tail into a stiff, rigid rod. And Ostrom figured this rod acted as a dynamic counterbalance. Super important for stability when it was running fast, turning sharp, or, leaping onto prey.
Huh. A counterbalancing terrible claw. It really is the whole package in just 2 words.
Yeah.
So beyond the name, what did this hunter actually look like? Give us the stats.
Okay, so Deinonychus was a medium-sized theropod. Think about 3.4 meters long. That's roughly 11 feet, snout to tail tip. Standing maybe 0.87 meters, like just under 3 feet, tall at the hip. Weight-wise, estimates put it between 70 and 100 kilos, so 150 to 220 pounds. Comparable to, say, a big wolf or maybe a jaguar today, a mid-sized predator. Its skeleton was quite gracile, meaning lightweight, with hollow bones, which makes sense for an agile hunter. The skull was pretty large, but also light, lots of openings, fenestrae. Jaws lined with about 60 sharp, blade-like teeth, serrated, curved backwards, good for tearing flesh, not for crushing bone. And its eyes, the sockets face partly forward, giving it good stereo vision, binocular vision, crucial for judging distance when leaping.
Right, and those arms, they were totally different from something like a T-Rex with its tiny little arms.
Oh, absolutely. Completely different. Deinonychus had remarkably long and powerful arms, and each arm ended in this large, three-fingered hand with long, sharp, curved claws. The wrist had this special half-moon-shaped bone, the semilunate carpal. It allowed for a lot of flexibility, a really powerful grasping motion. So those hands were clearly for grabbing and holding on to prey. Now, the feather question always comes up. It's important. To date, we haven't found a Deinonychus fossil with actual feather impressions preserved. Not yet. But the scientific consensus is pretty strong. It was almost certainly feathered. This idea comes from something called phylogenetic bracketing. It's like looking at the family tree. Basically, if you have close relatives on either side that have feathers, the one in the middle probably did too. And we have found lots of its close relatives, dromaeosaurs like Microraptor, Zenuanlong, with amazing feather preservation, maybe most compelling. We found Velociraptor fossils, a close cousin, with quill knobs on the forearm bones. Those are anchor points for big bird-like wing feathers. So given all that evidence, yeah, Deinonychus almost certainly had feathers. Maybe downy ones for warmth, and maybe more complex ones on the arms and tail for display or balance or even brooding eggs.
Okay, so we've got this picture. Agile, feathered, terrible claw. A serious predator. How did it live? What did it eat? You mentioned it was definitely a carnivore, and there's strong evidence linking it to one specific dinosaur, right?
That's right. The most compelling dietary evidence comes from finding Deinonychus remains frequently associated with the large orthopod Tenontosaurus. We find this across multiple dig sites. Deinonychus teeth, shed teeth, are commonly found among Tenontosaurus skeletons. And in at least one case, there's a Deinonychus tooth mark right in a Tenontosaurus bone. This strong taphonomic link, basically, how they're consistently found buried together, it fueled one of paleontology's biggest debates. Did Deinonychus hunt in packs?
Ah, the pack hunting debate. This is the image everyone has from the movies, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and it started with Ostrom himself. Back in 1969, he found the remains of 4 Deinonychus around a single, much larger Tenontosaurus at the main fossil site. His logic was pretty straightforward. One Deinonychus, wolf-sized, probably couldn't take down this huge herbivore alone, so he inferred they must have hunted cooperatively, like wolves, to bring down big prey. And that image, that powerful idea of coordinated pack hunting, just took off in popular culture, became the standard raptor image.
Yeah, it's a very compelling image.
Yeah.
But science moves on.
It does indeed. So in 2007, paleontologists Brian Roach and Daniel Brinkman took another hard look at this. They argued, look, applying a mammal model, like wolves, to a dinosaur might be problematic. Deinonychus's closest living relatives are other archosaurs, birds and crocs, and neither of them typically does complex, cooperative pack hunting of large prey. So Roach and Brinkman suggested a different model, based more on Komodo dragons or crocodiles. In their scenario, those bone beds aren't a cooperative hunt, they're more like a chaotic feeding aggregation. Maybe one Deinonychus made the kill, or maybe the Tenontosaurus was already dead. Its smell attracted others from the area. And the scene: intense, violent competition over the carcass, conflict, maybe even cannibalism between the Deinonychus. That scenario, they argued, better explains why you find multiple, often younger, incomplete Deinonychus skeletons at these sites.
Wow, that paints a very different picture, much more messy.
Definitely grittier, you could say. And then, adding another layer, a 2020 study looked at chemical isotopes in Deinonychus teeth. Joseph Fredrickson and colleagues. They found that the carbon isotope ratios were different in the teeth of young versus adult Deinonychus. That suggests their diets changed as they grew up. Young ones ate different things than adults. Now, this pattern is common in animals like Komodo dragons, where the young live separately and eat smaller stuff, partly to avoid being eaten by the adults. It's not typical of complex pack hunters like wolves, where adults often feed the young the same food. So what does this all mean for pack hunting? Well, the debate itself is a great example of how science works. You test hypotheses, you find new evidence. Right now, the consensus is kind of leaning away from coordinated wolf-style packs. It's leaning more towards maybe solitary hunting, or at best these loose, aggressive feeding frenzies.
Okay, so the social life is complicated. What about that famous claw, that 13-centimeter weapon on the toe? Clearly a weapon, but how exactly did it work? The first idea, the slashing idea, is the one everyone knows.
Yeah, the slashing and disemboweling idea was Ostrom's initial thought, and the media loved it. But biomechanics threw a wrench in that. In the mid-2000s, Phil Manning and his team did some cool studies. They used a full-scale robotic Deinonychus leg, even computer modeling, finite element analysis. They struck pig carcasses with it. What they found was the claw was great at puncturing, deep punctures, but it wasn't really built for slashing, didn't make big open wounds. Structurally, it wasn't ideal for that kind of stress. However, the models showed the claw was incredibly strong if the stress was downwards, like supporting the animal's weight. So they proposed it worked more like a climbing crampon. Latch onto the prey's high, hang on, and then attack with teeth and hands.
A crampon, that's completely
Okay.
different.
Totally. And that idea helped lead to the current, most widely supported theory, the RPR model. Proposed in 2011 by Denver Fowler and his team. They compared dromaeosaur feet and legs to modern birds of prey, hawks, eagles, that sort of thing, and they saw striking similarities, especially with accipitrids. So they proposed Deinonychus hunted like them, leap onto the prey, use its body weight to pin it down, and use those powerful grasping feet and that sickle claw as an anchor, a death grip. The prey would then be eaten, maybe while still alive, until it died from blood loss and organ failure. They called it the Raptor Prey Restraint Model, RPR.
RPR. Okay, that model seems to tie a lot of things together. The strong legs, the claw's shape.
It really does. If you think bigger picture, the RPR model is a pretty powerful unifying theory for Deinonychus's whole anatomy. Explains the strong legs and grasping feet for pinning, the long, stiff tail, crucial for balance on top of a struggling animal. Even the relatively weak bite makes sense if it was mostly for tearing flesh after the prey was pinned. And maybe most significantly, RPR gives a context for those long, feathered arms. They could have been used for stability flapping, beating the air to keep balance and control, like a hawk mantling over its kill. And that behavior, stability flapping, could be a plausible step towards powered flight in birds, an evolutionary precursor. So this predatory adaptation for hunting on the ground might have been a critical exaptation, a feature evolved for one thing, later used for another, that helped pave the way for the origin of flight, one of the biggest evolutionary steps ever.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. A killing claw on the ground, helping birds get into the air. But there's still some debate, right? You mentioned another controversy, bite force. The skull looks weak, but the bite marks look strong.
Exactly, it's another puzzle. The initial models, based on that light skull structure, suggested a pretty weak bite for its size, like a 30-kilo wolf maybe. But then a 2010 study looked at direct evidence, those tooth puncture marks in Tyrannosaurus bones we mentioned. By replicating how deep those punctures were, they calculated the force needed was huge, between 4,100 and 8,200 newtons. That's comparable to a similar-sized alligator, way stronger than a hyena. So you have this conflict. The skull looks weak, but the trace fossils suggest a powerful bite. How do we square that? It's still a big point of discussion.
Okay, so we have all this fascinating evolving science, and then there's the elephant in the room, or maybe the raptor in the kitchen. Jurassic Park, what does this all mean? Deinonychus is this huge scientific deal, but most people don't even know its name. Why?
Yeah, it's almost entirely down to Jurassic Park. Michael Crichton's novel in 1990. He created this terrifying monster, right? The super smart pack-hunting velociraptor. But Crichton's creature was based almost entirely on the science of Deinonychus, its size, its anatomy, the inferred pack behavior from Ostrom. Now, at the time Crichton was writing, there was actually a paleontological debate going on. Some scientists, like Gregory S. Paul, had proposed lumping Deinonychus into the Velociraptor genus as Velociraptor antirrhopus. That classification isn't widely accepted now, but it gave Crichton the opening he needed. He could use the name Velociraptor, which, let's face it, sounds cooler, more menacing for his Deinonychus-based dinosaurs. And then Spielberg's movie in '93 just cemented that misidentification in everyone's mind globally.
Right, and that created some major misconceptions that are still around today.
Oh, absolutely. A huge, persistent disconnect between public perception and scientific reality, especially in three key areas. First, size. People picture this human-sized killer from the movies. The reality, Deinonychus was about the size of a large dog or wolf, maybe 11 feet long total, weighing up to 220 pounds. And the actual velociraptor from Mongolia, much smaller, like turkey-sized, maybe 6-7 feet long, only 30-40 pounds. Totally different animal, different place, different time.
And the second big misconception, the visual one.
For feathers, exactly. The movie Raptor is scaly, reptilian. That image is so baked in. So when people see scientifically accurate reconstructions of Deinonychus or Velociraptor covered in feathers looking very bird-like, they often get confused or even push back. That doesn't look cool, or that's not scary. It's a real hurdle. And third, intelligence and behavior. I mean, raptors opening doors, setting traps, pure Hollywood. Fun, but fantasy. And as we've discussed, that core idea of coordinated pack hunting. Based on Ostrom's early idea, sure, but now heavily debated. Evidence leans more toward solitary or mob feeding.
It really is fascinating how one film can shape things so much. I remember thinking velociraptors were huge. And you mentioned our listener's query about the largest dromaeosaurid, clearly not Deinonychus.
Right. Great point. It shows how that Jurassic Park image dominates. Deinonychus was medium-sized for its family, the Dromaeosauridae. This family was incredibly diverse. You had true giants. Utah Raptor, found in '93, was massive, 6-7 meters long, maybe 500 kilos, like a polar bear. And Dakota Raptor, living right at the end of the Cretaceous with T-Rex, was around 5.5 meters. So the raptor niche wasn't just one thing, they filled different roles. Deinonychus is really this prime example of the complex dance between science and media. The movie sparked huge public interest, inspired future scientists, which is great, but it also locked in these facts that were either outdated or just plain wrong. It's a real challenge for science communication, for museums. You're constantly correcting these powerful media-driven images. The pop culture version almost competes with the scientific one. It's a big hurdle for scientific literacy.
So where does that leave us? The story clearly isn't finished. Even after, over 50 years of intense study, Deinonychus still keeps scientists busy. The big questions seem to have shifted from what was it to how did it live? Right? Like, will we ever really know for sure about the social behavior? Pack hunter, a lone wolf, or something in between? And that bite force paradox, the skull versus the teeth marks, how does that get resolved? And the big one, maybe will we ever find that holy grail specimen? Deinonychus preserved with clear feather impressions, or find more young ones, juvenile, subadults, to really track how they grew up, their ontogeny, see how their diet and behavior changed through life.
Those are absolutely the key questions driving research now. And it's not just about Deinonychus itself, its position and its relatives as the sister group to birds that's solid, but the exact branching pattern, the specific steps to flight still being refined. Some researchers have even thrown out this really radical idea. Could dromaeosaurs, like Deinonychus, actually be secondarily flightless, descended from a flying ancestor like Archaeopteryx? Testing ideas like that, it needs more fossils. Earlier, more primitive dromaeosaurs and early birds to fill the gaps. So the future isn't just about finding more bones, it's about using more sophisticated tools, interdisciplinary approaches to unlock how this amazing animal lived and how it fits into the grand story of evolution. So thinking about all this, what stands out to you when you consider this terrible counterbalancing claw and how it's still shaping our view of life's biggest evolutionary jumps?
It's incredible. We've seen how Deinonychus, the counterbalancing terrible claw, just completely turned paleontology on its head, sparked the Dinosaur Renaissance, and became this accidental, slightly misunderstood pop culture icon. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Deinonychus. We really hope you feel a bit more informed and maybe a lot more curious about the true story behind these amazing ancient predators. Until next time, keep digging for knowledge.